members, we're now streaming live.
Good evening and welcome to the inaugural meeting of the Finance and Performance Scrutiny Subcommittee. Please note this meeting is being streamed live to the internet. Please could all members ensure their microphone is set to mute unless they are speaking to reduce any background noise. It is important to remember that you may only speak when called by the chairman. Also ensure that any other devices nearby are switched to silent as they can be distracting. Members should use the raised hand button when they wish to speak. When it is your turn to speak, I will call your name and invite you to speak. Once you have spoken, I will flatten your hand. All votes will be taken by roll call, where the name of each member is read out, and they must respond with either for, against, or abstain. If any member loses connection during this meeting, then the meeting will be paused for a period of up to 3 minutes in order to give the relevant member the opportunity to rejoin the meeting. And we will start with item 1, apologies for absence.
No apologies this evening, Chairman.
Thank you. Item 2, declarations of interest. No, okay. And just before we move on to the next item, I just would like to say that the, Patricia, Councillor Rolfe.
Apologies, I did raise my virtual hand, then my literal. I'd just like to declare an interest as a member of New Romney Town Council, bearing in mind one of the reports does mention Town Council precepts. I know it's not absolutely necessary, but in the interest of transparency, I thought it best to do so.
Thank you very much. Yes, so before we move on to item 3, obviously in the next few items, there are a number of reports which we will look at. I just wanted to clarify that these reports are being considered are cabinet reports and the recommendations listed within them are for cabinet, and this committee will not be voting upon those recommendations. Also to say that any comments will be on any of the items will be noted and expressed to cabinet. Finally, in accordance with our new adopted protocols, this committee may make additional recommendations to cabinet. Any such recommendations must be proposed, seconded and voted upon accordingly. And we will move on to agenda item 3, which is the Key Performance Indicators Review 2020-2021 and half-year performance report for quarters 1 and 2. Thank you.
Good evening and thank you, Chair, and good evening, councillors. This report sets out a proposed list of key performance indicators to be monitored during the 2021 year in line with the council's current corporate plan, strategic priorities and objectives. This report also sets out performance data for the first 2 quarters of this year against these proposed key performance indicators. The last review of KPIs was adopted by Cabinet in September 2019 and has shaped the quarterly performance reporting to members throughout the 2019-20 year. There is ongoing work on the new corporate plan and recovery plan due for consideration in January 2021, which means performance reporting will continue to be in line with the priorities set out in the current corporate plan 2017-20, whilst a new set of KPIs are developed. The way in which we intend to do this was set out previously in a report to July Cabinet and is documented above in section 1.2 of this report. This year is therefore considered a transitional year, providing opportunity to review KPIs so that they focus on the longer term refresh priorities of the council, set out in the new corporate plan and recovery plan, forgive me. So the total number of KPIs proposed for this year are 72. In section 1.4 of the report, it proposes 15 KPI removals and section 1.5 proposes 7 KPI introductions for this year. A breakdown of the changes can also be found in Appendix 2. It should be noted there has been a small amendment following the publication of this report. The KPI referenced the number of private rental properties provided through the social lettings agency and property solutions. There will now be a target of 15 per quarter as opposed to no target previously proposed and published in this report. In Appendix 3, the quarterly performance report has been produced to summarise the council's performance covering quarters 1 and 2, which covers the period 1st of April to the 30th of September. During which, this has been noted, has been a challenging period due to the coronavirus pandemic. Where performance is not met, explanations have been given in the report, and those are documented within Appendix 3. I'm happy to take any questions that the committee might have.
Hey, thank you for that, Gavin. I open it up to members. Councillor Rolfe.
Hello, I'll go first. Right, okay, so I read the report and I'd like to focus on the following new KPIs that are being proposed. Under more homes, I'd like to suggest an additional one of encouraging high quality sustainable new homes within across the district should be added. Under more jobs, I'd like to see proactively supporting the development of the Romney Marsh Business Hub, because whilst we are doing that, it would be good to see that in one of the KPIs. We are obviously doing that, but it highlights the fact that we are doing that. Under appearance matters, I'd like to see the addition of proactively supporting the development. Reading back. Let's start again. Encouraging public realm improvements in all the district's high streets, because whilst that not only impacts on appearance matters, but it also impacts on hopefully retaining and developing more jobs. And I would like, and I'm surprised that more focus has not been given to the key bullet point of health matters. That is more important than ever in the midst, as we find ourselves in, of a global pandemic. So I would like to see the addition of the following, and this may cause some debate, but I feel it should actually be quite a key one if we are going to see key improvements to our health services locally. And I'd like to see that as ensure that Section 106 contributions towards health services are made by all developers who are who fall within the remit of such agreements, or indeed CIL payments. We need to ensure that if we're going to develop the significant number of new houses being proposed, 758 every year, then we need to ensure that those developers make each and every one of them make a contribution towards health services, which are, as we know, under enormous pressure at the moment. And I think that should actually, and I would like to point out that I would like to see health matters to be really a #1 priority at this time, especially this year. I think that's looking through my notes. I made a few more. In terms of monitoring on page 10, I'd like to see a monitoring bullet point of continuing the hub support whilst necessary to do so. I have a question over the bullet point in achieving stability at 3.5 of over 188,000 CIL receipts. But how is this prioritised? How is this allocated? And I was just pleased to see that at the bottom of page 12, the decision notice is issued by the ICO upholding the council's position on vexatious refusals to allow the team to focus their resources on processing the council's outstanding caseload. What a great result. And I think that's all my comments at the moment, and hope that they feed well into the ongoing discussion.
Thank you, Councillor Rolfe. Councillor Gain. Councillor Gain.
Sorry, you kept disappearing. The only comments I would make was, obviously, when we set these, they need to be realistic. And on the backdrop of the COVID-19, it's very hard to see how some of these are going to be achieved. I noticed that in the number of families in bed and breakfast, for example, we want none in, but at the moment we've gone from 1 to, I think it's 16, then to 12. So that's already skew-whiffed that particular one. So my question to the officer is, how many actually are these achievable under the present climate?
Gavin, would you like to come back on that?
Yeah. Thank you for your comments, Councillor Gain. As you know, these KPIs are set by these service managers that within their service plans. As I say, part of the work that we've done, there was a review of this in in August, forgive me, and we had a look at these again to check if these were still relevant for delivery, and that these were what were agreed. We do note around, especially around the one you've mentioned around bed and breakfast, that there is likely to be, as noted in the figures, there's going to be an increase in bed and breakfast provision, as well as homelessness approaches and temporary accommodation. We know that because of obviously the government's legislation around bans and evictions. So it is notable in the current circumstances, but these were the KPIs that we looked at, and we did I had a discussion with managers throughout August and as part of the formulation of the report, and they were quite happy to stick with those, with what we had there. So there was some degree of engagement with managers around this, based on what they've been provided in their service plans.
Thank you for that. Councillor Gain, did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. It does concern me that we're entering into a second lockdown, and obviously when these KPIs were done back in August, that wasn't actually on the cards. But thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Shube.
Thank you. Just a comment really on the format. On the exception reporting, could it in future just be made a bit clearer whether the figures are up or down on the targets? It's not always clear. Yeah, it's not always clear on that, but otherwise, yeah, thank you. That's all.
Thank you. And Councillor Rolfe again.
Thank you, Chairman. So I raised some queries about some, I think, very relevant possible additional KPIs. Can the officers comment on that, please?
Councillor McConville, would it be okay if I responded?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I think Councillor Rolfe, you raised a number of points there. Obviously, the KPI report, we focus on measurable targets, which are particularly pertinent to the current financial year. A lot of the points you raise, I think we could encapsulate within the action plan, which we're working on at the moment, in terms of the draft that will sit underneath the corporate plan that, as you know, is in development and out to consultation with the public at the moment. We have taken a note as you've run through there, and obviously we will have the minutes as well. I'd be very happy to take those points up through the development of the corporate plan and the action plan that's being developed also. And I'm happy to have a further conversation with you about them if that's acceptable to you.
Thank you, Charlotte. So, Councillor Rolfe, is that acceptable to you to be recorded as comments, or would you prefer that they be made a more formal recommendation?
In general, I'd like to see comments, but I'm really, really concerned about contributions by developers to, or lack of contribution by developers to as part of the S106. I think that's a real gap in our potential sort of improvement to, or it provides a gap that we could easily fill in terms of improvements to our local health infrastructure. And I think each and every one of us can agree that must be a priority at this time. You know, we're about to go into national lockdown, and anything we can do to help fund improvements to the services that will improve the health of our local communities must be a priority. So I don't know whether Charlotte can possibly comment on whether that can be seen as something to yes, or maybe David sort of kickstart this year, or whether it has to be delayed. But I just have a real strong sort of feeling that should be brought forward and actually implemented ASAP.
Thank you, Councillor Rolfe. Councillor Monk.
Thank you, Chairman. To reply to Councillor Rolfe, I did actually talk to her today about this. It's not a very simple thing. First of all, this is a question about KPIs. We don't have a KPI for what she's talking about. What she is actually talking about is a change of policy. So to do that, we have to work with our consultees. Kent County Council has a lot to say about where our 106 money goes, and whilst I'm quite sure the CCGs would like to have a contribution as well, it needs talking and setting up a policy that we haven't got at the moment. So whilst Councillor Rolfe might have that ambition, and I can understand that ambition, especially because of the poor health provision on the Marsh Fire, especially doctor surgeries. Whilst I can understand that, it isn't an easy thing, and I will take it forward for discussion as a part of our policy with regards to contributions from developers. But I think it's outside the scope of this particular paper.
Thank you, Councillor Monk. Councillor Rolfe, is that an acceptable response for your queries? We're happy to take them further.
It is for the moment, but I'll talk outside the meeting about some feedback from other sources and other district councils.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anyone else have anything to say on this agenda item 3? No, okay. Then we will move forward to agenda item 4, an update on the 2020-2021 general fund budget.
Sorry, Chairman, can we just have a note and receive report for the first report?
Okay, yep. We're happy to note that report.
A proposer and a seconder, and then if everybody's in agreement.
Okay. Yeah, okay. I'm happy to propose. If I could have a seconder, please. Councillor Rolfe.
And is everybody
Councillor...
in?
Agreed.
Anyone in agreed? Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Okay, yes, so agenda item 4, update on the 2020-2021 general fund budget.
Thank you, Chair. Members will recall that we brought forward a paper back in June, very early on during the COVID outbreak, modelling some different scenarios of what we thought the impact in year may be. And at that time, we were anticipating a potential gap of around 4.93 million, and we'd been allocated about £1.2 million worth of funding at that time. The report that's in front of you provides an update on the current position and builds on the budget monitoring report for the general fund that was considered by Cabinet last month. The report that was considered by Cabinet anticipated a projected outturn at year end of a deficit of 1.322 million. And this report seeks to outline how we might seek to bridge some of the gap. The table in 3.1 outlines the funding that we have received from the central government to date. The 2.241 million that's outlined there, that's all funding that's been allocated directly to the council for the council's deployment in use. Obviously, we've had further funding than that that we've been allocated in order to passport on to other parties, but these are the funding that we've had in relation to the council. Some of that funding has been earmarked for specific purposes, and some of it has been awarded to us in a more general sense to close the gap. Since the Q2 report was drafted, the tranche 4 funding has been announced, and it's referred to in section 3.2 of the report. We were awarded a further £609,785 through tranche 4. So it's anticipated that that would reduce the Q2 projected outturn to a position of just over 700,000. And we also know that there will be further funding that would be allocated to us for losses to fees and charges for the remainder of the year. The projection that we have within the budget monitoring paper only took us up to July. So there will be a reimbursement for the remainder of the year, which hasn't been factored in. Equally, obviously, I wrote this paper before we were aware of the second lockdown, and there will be consequences of the second lockdown, obviously, for our position. I can't quantify those at this moment in time, but obviously we will continue to monitor the budget, and we'll be bringing forward an updated budget monitoring position to members in January that we will be basing on data at the end of November. So hopefully we'll be able to capture quite a lot of that picture. So based on what we know at this point, we feel that we closed the gap to around 700,000. Officers were tasked earlier in the year with identifying potential operational budgets that could be reduced, and these are outlined in 4.2 of the report on page 38 of the pack. These were all discussed with the relevant portfolio holder, and they were specifically selected to have the most minimal impact on frontline service provision. That was a direction from Cabinet at the time, and officers have stuck to that. So there's around £550,000 worth of environments which we're proposing to Cabinet here to be taken, and that would reduce the gap based on the projections to around 162,000. Section 5 of the report covers the current reserves position, and as we outline in the paper, we feel that the 162,000 represents a manageable sum for the council to operate within, and officers will obviously continue to work to minimise that gap and to close it. But it seems appropriate at this point to outline to members what level of reserves that we're holding, and also signal that whilst it isn't our hope to have to deploy reserves in order to close the gap, we are operating in an exceptional year, and therefore it is possible. So very happy to take any questions that members might have on the paper. It will be considered by Cabinet next week. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. I open it up to members. Councillor Gain.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the report. I think because of the November lockdown, I think this makes it very hard to see this as it's the best that you can do at the moment. And I think that's as much as you can say, because things are obviously going to change with the closure of businesses and etc. And so I think personally, this is the best opportunity at the moment, but is actually going to change. There's not much else you can say to it. I think January may well be a better indication.
Thank you, Councillor Gain. Councillor Rolfe.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for this very comprehensive report, Charlotte. I'm just going to focus on a couple of queries regarding the operational budgets that are being reduced. ICT maintenance, I'm surprised that we're reducing that, or there is the ability to reduce that at the moment, given that ICT is so crucial to us holding even this meeting, but also just generally operating virtually as as many businesses and this council is doing so. So I'd just like confirmation that that is still possible. I'll put a comment out there that the pesticide motion being delayed is actually very reasonable, but I would urge all councillors to be mindful when at this time when our council officers and teams are under such great pressure to be mindful of the potential cost and impact on their time when introducing such motions. This does actually highlight that. And with regard to the reduction in corporate estate repairs and maintenance, I'd just like clarification that in reducing that budget by 25,000, there are no health and safety implications in so doing. Okay, and then at 5.6, which relates to the climate change reserve and the fact that at the moment we're not looking to reduce that. Is there any sort of link with the further government initiatives that have been very recently introduced in relation to renewable energy and other matters? So that could potentially impact on the amount we require. In other words, government providing funding for some of the potential initiatives to release the funding that we've allocated to other sources. And I think that's all my comments on this report, but very well written, and thank you very much again.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rolfe. Charlotte, would you like to come back on some of those points?
Yes, sure, of course. Thank you, Chair. So I can confirm that there'll be no operational impact from reducing the IT maintenance budget. That particular item is a tidy up of some existing budgets and won't undermine any of the existing IT provision. In terms of the corporate estate, there will be no health and safety implications. Those budgets have been safeguarded and aren't proposed to be reduced through these changes. In terms of 5.6, the council's keeping a very close watching brief with our climate change officer on all of the funding opportunities that are available. So we will seek to utilise those, obviously, wherever they become available. It will be a matter for members should we choose to deploy the climate change earmarked reserve in a different way than was originally intended and proposed. But we will obviously seek to secure external funding wherever possible. The target is quite significant, and the £5 million will probably not be sufficient to do everything. So we will seek to find alternative funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Councillor Rolfe, did you want to come back on any of that, or Is that okay?
No, just very, very happy and happy for the public confirmation that we are seeking external grants for this very area that the council has identified, but also the fact that that offset could actually potentially, but not definitely, impact into and be rediverted to other, divide across to other areas. So hopefully good result, but thank you, Sharon.
Thank you. Any other member wishing to speak? No, okay. Councillor Gain again.
I'd like to move we note the report.
Okay, happy to second that, but I would also just like to ask Charlotte quickly, just on table 4.2 again, the DWP new burdens grant funding. Obviously, it's the biggest amount in that table. We could just have a little bit of information on that, please.
Yes, certainly, Councillor. The DWP New Burdens grant funding, we don't generally get the announcement on confirmation of that funding until nearly the new financial year. So we tend to take a fairly prudent approach to our inclusion of that within the base budget. And we were awarded it, obviously, this year. So this is the application of grant that we anticipated, but that we didn't budget for because we couldn't be confident we would definitely receive.
Thank you very much. Councillor Shube.
Thank you. Could you just talk us through on the homelessness prevention line on 5.2? Yeah, there's no movement forecast on that using that reserve.
I might need to defer to a colleague. I might need to defer to Cheryl. I believe that's I believe that's grant funding that we've received from the government specifically for homelessness prevention. But I'll ask Cheryl if perhaps she could answer that question.
Sure. Yes, that is correct. It is grant funding received. The reason there is no forecast use at the moment is because it's almost a year behind. So the in-year expenditure is being funded by current year allocations, and that money in reserve is from previous years that were allocated right at the very end of the first year in March. And so we're just rolling that forward until we don't have any in-year allocations anymore to fund expenditure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we've proposed and seconded to note the report. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Lovely. Okay, and then we move on to item number 5, which is the update to the General Fund Medium-Term Capital Programme.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lee.
Right, the report is in 2 sections. Section 2 of the report lists 4 capital schemes where decisions have already been taken, but where full council approval is required for the budget changes to include those schemes, those budgets within the medium-term capital programme. Hopefully members are already familiar with the 4 capital schemes listed. I'll just pause at that point if there's any particular questions around the schemes in section 2.
Members, does anyone have any questions regarding the schemes outlined in question 2? Oh, okay, carry on, Lee. Okay,
now section 3 of the report deals with or considers a proposal from Veolia Environmental Services for the provision of loan funding to them from Folkestone and Hythe and Dover district councils on a joint basis to enable them to meet the cost of the fleet required for the new joint waste contract. And this council's share of the capital funding for the fleet is just over £4 million. Now the proposal would result in the council receiving a rebate, an annual rebate of about £100,000 against the proposed annual cost of the contract. And this is possible because both councils, both Folkestone and Dover councils, can borrow money at significantly lower interest rates than those available to the contractor. I should say at this point, the cabinet version of the report has got an amendment. It's got an additional section in which I'll read out to you, new section 3.2.9. If you can just bear with me while I call that up. And I'll just read out what's in the cabinet report. It says, although Veolia Environmental Services represent a low credit risk for the loan being proposed, in finalising the arrangement, consideration will be given to various options in order to protect the council's position. So what that statement is saying is that officers will explore with Veolia a way of, if possible, securing the loan against the assets, against the vehicle. That is something which is being explored. So in addition to the work which Arlene Close, who have advised both Folkestone and Dover councils regarding the proposal from Veolia, so they've looked at both the proposal in terms of the financial benefit, but also in terms of the credit worthiness of Veolia. And Arlene Close's view is that the credit risk of entering into this sort of deal is reasonable and matched by the savings that are likely to be achieved. So that's all outlined in section 3 of the report. And I think at that point, Chair, I'm happy to take any questions that I can answer regarding
Okay,
this.
thank you, Lee. Yes, open it up to members. Councillor Rolfe.
Thank you, Chairman. Actually, that's interesting because 3.2.9 actually addresses one of the quite key concerns. I mean, obviously, the contract to purchase, from as I read it, and just please clarify this, Lee, we'll be providing a loan to VES, and they will be contractually engaging and purchasing the new vehicles, which means that those new vehicles will be on their balance sheet and not the council's. So I would have liked to sort of ensure that there is some sort of charge to say that we have some sort of ownership of the items for which we loan, which is in basically normal lease agreements. The lease company owns, or the loan company owns the item until the loan is paid. So that needs to be seriously built into. So such that, I mean, at the end of the day, when you've got quite major companies at the moment going belly up in the midst of a global pandemic, which has had financial impact of unprecedented proportions, I think we need to ensure that public loan, which is basically what this will be through the council, is guaranteed as much as possible, and the only way we can guarantee it is against the assets that will be that the loan will be purchasing. So I would urge officers to ensure that this is done. But apart from that, because apart from that, without that, this is a real risk for the council, despite the savings, and the savings at this point can't necessarily be guaranteed without that. That's my comments, and I'd be interested to hear Lee's comments on that.
Thank you, Councillor Rolfe. Lee, did you want to come back?
Well, what I can say is that the negotiations which are ongoing with the procurement team, procurement and contracts team within the authority that are leading on this are looking at the contract and negotiating with Veolia. Obviously, in conjunction with Dover, I've got to remember this, it's both councils we're talking about here, and they're looking at this at the moment. It will be down to whether Veolia are happy for a charge to be had on their vehicles. If they are, and they're happy to offer the rebate that's been offered, then fine. I think we should be able to proceed. Clearly, if they're unhappy to take a charge, then we've got to step back and consider the position going forward. But I can't comment on that. I mean, that is that will be down to the negotiations that need to take place. But that's certainly the remit that we're moving forward with, and say the head of contracts and procurement is working on that basis at the moment.
Thank you for that, Lee. Councillor Monk.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, of course, I don't disagree with Councillor Rolfe, and any sane person would like to see some guarantees. Arlene Close make some cogent arguments that we needn't worry too much. However, that doesn't stop us worrying. But you do have to weigh it up against, and we are looking to get some security if we can get it. But there is a downside to it if we don't do it. £100,000 a year saving is in MTF terms £1 million over 4 years. So we have to really consider our options here. But all I can say is I am in favour of having some security against the loan. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Monk. Councillor Rolfe, did you want to come back at all?
I need to say thank you for the reassurance that this will be followed up. I do take on board Councillor Monk's comments, but you know, I do feel that we need to do all we can to secure what is a loan, despite the savings that are involved. So, but thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillor wishing to speak? Okay, can I just for my own maths, please, Lee, just so I got it definitely right. So obviously, the contract would have been 10 million a year for the 8 years. If we obviously give Veolia the loan, that will reduce to 8.75 per year. So, I mean, our portion of the savings would be about 5 million over the term of the contract, and we're going to loan them about 4.05. So we would have about 950,000 left spread over the 8 years. Is that pretty much an accurate assessment? Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, the rebate the way it will work, obviously, the rebate would, they'd be paying back the loan out of the rebate. So we get the net saving will be this approximately £100,000 a year over the 8 years. So £800,000 as a revenue saving over that period. The value of the rebate means that the loan will also be repaid. So the £4 million that we're paying out will get repaid to us over that period of time. That will come back to the council as part of, I call it a rebate, but it will be an adjustment to the full contract sum. That's how this will work.
Thank you for that. And I mean, in terms of the savings we'll make, I mean, do we know, you know, what of that will go on interest repayments to repay the loan over the period of the contract?
Well, the £100,000 net saving is a net saving. So yes, we've got to borrow money and we've got to, you know, we had interest charged to the council to do that. The £100,000 annual saving is the saving over and above the cost of our interest. So that is a cash, you know, cash saving, cash benefit to the council.
Okay, lovely. Thanks very much. So then I'm happy to propose that if I can have a seconder.
Yeah.
And agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so we move on to our final item. Item number 6, which is just a briefing, and it's on the medium-term financial plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Bear with me a second. Also, share a presentation. Okay. Could someone just indicate to me that you can see that?
I can see it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so as you'll be aware, we review the medium-term financial strategy on an annual basis. normally in the autumn of the year, and that kickstarts the budget process for the coming financial year. So I've just got a brief presentation here for you where I'll talk you through the headline indications of the medium-term financial strategy, talk through some of the key assumptions that have been used in arriving at that, talk through the kind of most likely scenario and some volatility and financial sensitivity around that, and also around the strategy position. So our medium-term financial strategy spans a 4-year period. So this particular MTFS covers 2021-22 through to 24-25. We incorporate all of the known financial trends that are different from the existing baseline. So as you'll recall, we work on a baseline, and legislatively we need to work on a baseline whereby we have a balanced budget going into the year. So our 2021 budget was balanced, and we take that position and we move it forward for the known financial trends, and that's the approach that we take to the MTFS. Our MTFS assumptions don't include changes to the baseline fees and charges structure, and they don't include growth and savings initiatives which are proposed by officers. Both of those things are considered in the next step of the budget cycle, and I'll talk about the next steps at the end of the presentation. So the headline for our MTFS is that the gap for each year of the 4 years that I mentioned there is in the range of 3.2 to 3.6 million. So spanning over the 4 years, the MTFS identifies a budget gap of 13.7 million. So clearly that's very significant to the council. However, it is worth noting that if an annual saving was taken out of the baseline of £3 million, so if we were able to make that for next financial year, which is a very tall order, but theoretically, if we were able to for 21-22, then that would reduce the cumulative gap by £12 million over the 4 years. So I think that demonstrates quite clearly the year-on-year pressures that we have identified in the MTFS. So most of what I'm going to talk about is the most likely scenario. The officers who are in attendance at the meeting, who have done all of the detailed analysis building into the MTFS, have worked up 3 different scenarios. The most likely, which is what I'll focus on, a pessimistic scenario and an optimistic scenario, and have considered the assumptions around all 3 of those scenarios. Because of COVID-19, we have had to consider a kind of key economic principle, a key economic assumption, which is an overriding assumption that we've used for an awful lot of the different factors that we build into the MTFS. And we have considered, in terms of the most likely scenario, a 2-year recovery period for the elements which affect the council's own finances. As it's noted there, the pessimistic assumption works on a basis of 3-year recovery period, and the optimistic a 1-year recovery period. The exercise that's been undertaken to arrive at these numbers was an extremely detailed exercise. Mark, who's with us, interviewed all of CLT directors, AD, and the vast majority of the operational leads within the council. We utilised the Q2 budget monitoring data to identify the existing financial trends, and he also discussed with those officers changes in legislation, other significant changes affecting their service area, which he has forecast into the MTFS. And he has considered some further assumptions where the largest differential around the optimistic and the pessimistic values. So some key assumptions that we've taken in here are outlined there. So as I mentioned, we have used this headline assumption around a 2-year recovery, anticipated CPI increases over the period of 0.5, 1, 2 and 2%. We've anticipated, based on advice that we've had from our Treasury advisors, that interest rates payable will remain low for the entire period of the MTFS. And these, I should just stress, these are all assumptions. There are still political decisions to be taken over a number of the factors that I'm just about to mention. But for the use of assumptions, we have assumed a precept increase for the District Council of 1.99. We don't currently know what the referendum limit will be, but we have worked on an assumption of 1.99. We've worked on assumptions around annual pay award and the pressures that we face due to incremental increases in salary. We've assumed there's some detailed work that's happened in the background around parking income. As a sort of overriding principle, we've used the 2 years recovery and assumed that we would get back to 85% of previous volumes within those 2 years. But we have also looked at that in more detail in terms of car parks, which are town centre and commuter car parks, and those car park facilities which are more coastal or recreational. We have made some assumptions around maintenance and income levels around Hythe Pool. As you know, Hythe Pool is has suffered a drop in income. We've made some assumptions around Otterpool Park. As you know, you've just heard around the waste contract. The new contract sees an incremental budget pressure of 950,000 on the base price, but we are anticipating a credit of the 100,000 that Lee's just outlined to you. And we have got some space at Connect 38, and we assume that some of that may remain empty over the short term. This analysis just identifies those same points and what makes up the £3.5 million gap in 21-22. And this slide covers the financial sensitivity. So it shows the main areas of sensitivity in terms of the more favourable case and the worst case, and how those key elements are affected. In terms of the strategy itself and the reserves, the MTFS, one of the key appendices to the MTFS is actually the reserves policy. So I've just picked out a few key elements of the reserves policy here. So you'll be aware that we primarily hold reserves for 4 reasons: a working balance to help us cushion the impact of uneven cash flows and avoid unnecessary borrowing. We use it as a contingency for unexpected events or emergencies, such as we are experiencing this year. It provides us with a means of building up funds to meet known or predicted liabilities in the future. And it is also a means of setting aside sums for future identified uses and or investments, which is an approach we have taken in recent years. We try to apply some fundamental principles around reserves. So we do seek to primarily use reserves to fund one-off expenditure, but not exclusively so. I'm proposing in the updated reserves policy that any recurring items funded from reserves, we seek to replenish that use within a 36-month period. We do use reserves for unplanned revenue income receipts, as Cheryl mentioned earlier with the homelessness grants that we've received. We do use reserves for that purpose. It's important as an authority that we do maintain our reserves at a sustainable level, so that we've got adequate working balances. And I have proposed in the reserves policy that we maintain a general reserve no lower than 1.5 million. And obviously we can use it to balance the budget, but obviously we need to act in the best interests of the council. So you'll have seen from the previous report that we tabled, the general reserve currently holds 3.3 million and earmarked reserves 13.5. So we are holding a good level of reserves as an authority, but as you'll hear accountants say regularly, you can only deploy reserves once, and once used, they are used. So we need to think carefully about their deployment. So in terms of the medium-term financial strategy, the next key element is just around what our approach is going to be. So you'll be aware of the transformation programme that's been ongoing for some time within the council, and that programme is coming to a conclusion over the next 6 months and will deliver anticipated in excess of £1 million worth of savings. So that will contribute towards the shortfall. You'll be aware that the council already has a number of strategic investment projects underway, Otterpool being the most significant, but there are others. And they, the aim is that they, over the medium term, support the council's financial position and help move us towards a sustainable position. There is a commitment to a financial review, and I'll touch on that in just a minute in terms of next steps. We have got a policy in place where we will seek to explore commercial opportunities or utilise fees and charges for services which are discretionary and ensure a minimum full cost recovery, and in the context of commercial opportunities, we'll seek to act in the best interests of the council. And of course, as I mentioned already, we do have a good level of reserves available at our deployment, and we are, through the policy framework, able to deploy these so that we do not have to take knee-jerk reactionary steps which might affect frontline services. So the MTFS is just the beginning of the budget cycle. We've got a number of steps to go through before February, and many of these are underway already. We undertake a review of fees and charges. That review's largely been undertaken by officers, and we're now in the process of briefing Cabinet portfolio members on the proposals. We ask all budget managers within the council to identify growth and savings relevant to the coming financial year. CLT met today to have the first discussion about the growth and savings, and I have to say officers have done a really good job this year in identifying potential savings. We build both of those things into the budget strategy document, which will come forward to Cabinet in December, and that document seeks to start to identify one, firming up the MTFS position for next financial year, but it also seeks to identify how we're going to start to close the gap, what the plans are. We undertake a base budget financial review that I mentioned in the previous slide. So we will look at every budget in the council and build the base budget up for 21-22 on that basis. We are currently undertaking a review of capital bids. Lee will be looking at the funding of those capital bids, and we're also undertaking a review of reserves to ensure that they're aligned to our current priorities. The detailed budget will come forward to yourselves and Cabinet in January, and we'll be undertaking budget consultation alongside that. And all of those things will build to the base budget and council tax setting, which will be considered by full council in February. The challenge of the MTFS is quite significant this year. So the process, I don't imagine, will end there. I would have thought that our medium-term plans will continue to develop over the coming year for that 4-year life cycle. I'm very happy to take any questions that you might have. I'm going to take the presentation down because it's difficult to see faces whilst it's up. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Charlotte. A very thorough presentation. Right, open it up to councillors. Councillor Shube.
Thank you. Just an observation, really. The contradiction, the tension, I guess, between our reliance and need for parking charges and our pressing need to meet our carbon targets as well. Yeah, just want to flag that. But I acknowledge that that as things stand, it's quite striking that we are so dependent in such need of those parking charges. How we resolve that, I don't know, but just wanted to highlight that, really. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shoup. Any other councillor wishing to come in? Councillor Monk.
Thank you, Chairman. Just trying to start my video. Yes, thank you. Yes, Charlotte gave you a very good overview. Just to Councillor Shoup, I don't care whether the parking's by petrol-driven vehicles or electric vehicles or hydrogen-driven vehicles. I just need the income. And I think people will want vehicles no matter what the form of propulsion is, just as an aside, that is. Now, what you've heard tonight is a typical quandary of a council. It is nothing new. It is severe. The pandemic has made it extremely severe. But over the last 15 years, I've been at this situation before. And if you go back a few years, certainly every bit as bad, those figures that came forward. And yet we've worked steadily and got past them. And in fact, landed up with some reserves that will look after us, I hope, through the next couple of years and see us out of this. So again, there's just a couple of things. In that slide, you saw that 4% for staff wage increases. It seems excessive, but if you notice, it also includes increments. Now, if you're not used to council and local government wage structures, it is banded, and in those bands, as you move along, you get an increment on top of whatever the wage rise is. So that's why it looks particularly high. And I would ask you, would you really want to cut it, seeing what they've done for us this year through the pandemic? I think probably not. So there we go. And this is what it is. But if it's a very simple thing. If you save £100,000 per year in 4 years, that's £1 million you've saved out of your MTFS. So it is critical. We do have to go forward, and we, again, because we've done transformation and we haven't quite finished it, but once we finished it, that all contributes to cutting our costs, and it goes forward. It is not a position we want to be in, but I think with some prudence and with some sensible things and no knee-jerk reactions, I'm totally against knee-jerk reactions, we will get over this and come out of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Monk. Councillor Rolfe.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you for a really great presentation, Charlotte. I hate to sort of be a pessimist because I try to be an optimist at all times. However, we live in what is actually unprecedented times. And how can we, I mean, obviously this is reviewed year on year and quarter on quarter as appropriate. But the fact is that, you know, there are several health professionals out there saying that it's possible, not definite, that the pandemic and COVID-19 as is will be with us for a long time, and we've basically got to adjust for the long term to a new normal and learn to live with it, which obviously impacts quite significantly across a number of key areas. How can we address that other than appropriate interviews, reviewing and taking into account the situation as is? Because there is a possibility that the pessimistic option you put there is actually quite optimistic. Just some comments.
Thank you, Councillor Rolfe. Councillor Monk, did you want to come back?
Yeah, again, I'll come back. Yes, we are facing the unknown, but there will be a new normal that comes out of it. We've unfortunately had to go into another lockdown today or this week because people weren't obeying the very simple rules. Now, unfortunately, that affects us, although we were one of the best districts in the country for keeping down the infection rate. And whilst we were keeping that down, it didn't stop our shops from opening. It didn't stop our hospitality industry from operating. And I think that the lesson of this particular lockdown will ring home, and people will see across the country that they've got to behave themselves and stick to the rules. And if they stick to the rules, we can come out of this. We were coming out of it quite nicely, and our revenues were starting to increase. Car parks were starting to be used again, and now we've been shut down again through no fault of our own, because the people of this district have been very, very sensible. Us and Dover are some of the lowest rates in the country of infection because we obey the rules. So again, whilst I understand what Patricia Rolfe is saying, I haven't got a crystal ball, but these things come to pass. They always have done, and all I'm saying is, let's not have a knee-jerk reaction. Let's not cut services, because that's one way we can save money. We can just chop our services and stop spending money. That does it. But is that what we want to do? I don't think so. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Monk.
Sorry, could I just add one further thing?
Yes.
Sorry, what I probably should have said is that the modelling that we've undertaken in the MTFS doesn't anticipate any additional grants next year. So whereas you have seen in the current year budget paper that we've received over, well, the best part of £3 million of central funding, we have taken a prudent approach. It's currently unknown what the local government settlement will be for next year. So we haven't anticipated any additional funding next year, whereas obviously we have anticipated an ongoing impact of COVID-19 on our own financial position. So it's worth saying that we will be continuing to update our projections through the budget strategy process, through the detailed budget process, and of course, once we know what the local government finance settlement is indeed for ourselves for next year. And those will all help sharpen up our assumptions. We obviously can't anticipate exactly what will happen in terms of COVID-19 and any further lockdowns, but I suppose I would remain optimistic that perhaps the funding picture will look slightly better than we've currently modelled. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Any other councillor wishing to speak? Okay, just for me, Charlotte, I mean, would it be right in thinking that obviously after February, after we set the budget for the next financial year, that we would have an opportunity in this subcommittee to just have another look at where we are in terms of, you know, the MTFS, sort of once we sort of know what we're doing financially next for the next financial year?
Yes, certainly, Chair. So, I mean, we would normally refresh the MTFS just annually. It's normally an annual cycle, but I think with the uncertainty that we face at the moment, it would probably be prudent to undertake that review maybe twice a year. So we'd be very happy to bring it back to the subcommittee when we review it next time round. And I think probably once we understand the spending review and the local government finance settlement late this year, early next year, it would be a good opportunity to think again about the MTFS. Yeah, absolutely.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Okay. Does anyone, one last chance, does any member wish to add anything to that? If not, then let's say thank you to all the officers for their information and presentations. Thank you to Cabinet Monk as the council member for attending, and I wish everyone a very good evening.
Thank you,
I
Chairman.
formally close the meeting.